I was driving down a back road late one October night, trying to get home before the storm blew in. The sky had been gray all day, and by the time the sun disappeared behind the ridges, a low, rolling fog had begun to crawl along the ground. The road was narrow, the kind of asphalt that never sees maintenance, lined with trees so close together their branches met overhead, forming a natural tunnel. My headlights barely cut through the gloom, and I kept slowing down, squinting for deer or rocks that might have fallen in the middle of the lane. I'd been taking this shortcut for years, but that night it felt different, heavier somehow, as if the air itself was pressing down, making every breath a little harder. I remember seeing it first out of the corner of my eye, something tall at the edge of a clearing just beyond the bend. My stomach dropped, and I hit the brakes so hard my seatbelt dug into my shoulder. The car shuddered to a stop, and I leaned forward, straining to see. At first I thought it was a man standing in the shadows, but the shape didn't make sense. The limbs were wrong, longer than any humans, angled in ways that shouldn't have been possible. It didn't move at all, not a twitch, not a breath. The only thing that felt real was the way its gaze seemed to fix on me, even from the darkness. I wanted to drive away, slam the accelerator, and put as much distance between us as possible. But something rooted me to the spot, a cold dread that refused to let go. I stepped out of the car, partly to get a better look, partly because my body had stopped listening to my mind. The air was thick with the scent of wet leaves and the faint metallic tang of an approaching storm. I squinted, my heart hammering, but when I moved closer, it wasn't there. The clearing was empty. The fog hung low, swirling gently around the underbrush, but there was no trace of whatever had been standing there. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone to try and get a picture. I wanted to convince myself it was just a trick of the headlights, a tree shaped oddly in the shadows, but every instinct screamed that I had seen something real, something that should not exist. I got back in the car and locked the doors, trying to steady my breathing. The road ahead seemed impossibly long, the trees closing in, shadows lengthening and twisting as the fog rolled across the asphalt. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me flinch so hard I nearly drove off the edge into the ditch. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure following me. And though the road behind was empty, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the nerves and the isolation of that stretch of road, but the fear stuck with me, gnawing at the edges of my mind long after I had reached the main highway. The next day, I told a friend about it, hoping someone could rationalize it, maybe convince me I'd imagined the whole thing. But when we went back during daylight to look at the clearing, we found tracks. They were strange, too long, too narrow to belong to any animal I knew, deep impressions in the soft mud that seemed almost purposeful. I ran my hand along the edges and shivered. There was a weight to them, like whatever had made them had mass beyond human. We followed them for a short distance, but they vanished into the woods, leaving nothing behind. My friend shrugged and told me to forget it, chalk it up to my imagination. I wanted to, truly, but something inside me knew it wasn't that simple. That night, when I got home, I kept checking the windows, every shadow in my yard twisting into shapes that made my stomach knot. I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining that same figure at the edge of the clearing, eyes fixed on me, waiting. Sometimes I would hear footsteps outside, soft and deliberate, moving around my house in a way no animal could make. I convinced myself it was just branches scraping or raccoons, but deep down, I knew it was something else, something patient and intelligent, lingering just beyond the edge of sight. Days turned into weeks, and I haven't driven that road since. The memory of that night lingers like a shadow in my mind, creeping into quiet moments and making my chest tighten. I've tried to talk about it, to share it with friends or coworkers, but the words never come out right. They sound ridiculous, absurd, unbelievable. But I remember every detail, the unnatural stance, the way the limbs didn't bend properly, the terrible stillness of it. And I remember the way it made me feel, small, exposed, hunted. Sometimes I hear noises when I'm alone at home, a soft shuffle just outside my window, a faint snap in the yard. My rational mind tells me it's nothing, just wildlife, the wind, the house settling, but I can't shake the feeling that it's the same thing I saw in the clearing, watching, waiting. I catch myself peering into the shadows of the trees at the edge of my property, expecting to see it there, and I can't explain why I feel that same cold dread I felt on that road. trick of the light, but I can't bring myself to. Part of me knows it's still out there somewhere, patient, waiting for the same road to be quiet and empty again, for another set of headlights to catch its gaze in the fog. Even now, I can remember the sound of the storm rolling in that night, the way the leaves seemed to whisper in the wind, the strange, unnatural stillness that had filled the clearing. I replay it over and over, and every time my heart pounds just as hard as it did then. It wasn't just the sight. It was the feeling of being watched, of knowing I had stumbled on something I wasn't meant to see. It's a feeling that doesn't leave, that lingers, a quiet, gnawing dread that slips into my thoughts at odd moments. Sometimes I wonder if it's even real to this day, or if I've carried the fear so long it's become part of me. But every so often at night I hear something just beyond the edge of my yard, and I remember. It's out there, still waiting, still patient, and it hasn't forgotten me. When my grandfather passed, the old farm went to me. My parents didn't want it. They said it was too far gone to be worth fixing, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it. He'd raised me there for a few summers when I was young, and even though the memories were hazy, I remembered him sitting on the porch at dusk, watching the tree line like he expected something to come out of it. He'd always tell me to be inside before dark, no exceptions. I never questioned it back then. Now, standing in front of the same house 20 years later, I understood that it wasn't just superstition that kept him careful. The place hadn't aged well. The farmhouse leaned a little, paint flaking off in strips. The barn out back, once a bright red, had faded into a dull, splintered brown, its roof sagging like a tired old man. I told myself I'd start with repairs on the house, maybe get the plumbing working before winter. But every time I looked out the back window, the barn seemed to pull my attention. Something about it didn't sit right. The windows were blacked out with grime, and yet, sometimes when the light hit just right, I thought I saw movement inside. Probably rats or birds, I told myself. Still, I avoided it for weeks. One evening, curiosity got the better of me. The sun was dipping behind the ridge, painting the fields in that deep Appalachian gold that makes everything look like it's holding its breath. I grabbed a flashlight and headed for the barn. The air was still, too still, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. The boards groaned under my boots as I pushed the door open. A smell hit me immediately. Old hay, rusted metal, and something else. Something damp, rotting. Inside it was darker than it should have been. The sunlight through the slats didn't reach far, swallowed by the shadows that clung to the corners. I ran the flashlight across the room. Dust floated through the beam like slow-moving snow. The old tractor was still there, half buried under a tarp, and next to it some rusted tools my grandfather must have left behind. I moved deeper, the floorboards creaking beneath me. That's when I noticed it, the feeling, like someone was watching. At first I brushed it off as nerves, but it didn't go away. It grew heavier, pressing on the back of my neck until I had to turn around. Nothing. Just the same dark corners, the same silence. But when I turned the flashlight back toward the far wall, I saw something that made my stomach twist. The shadows there were moving, not fast, not enough to be obvious, but slowly, like they were breathing. I blinked, stepped closer, and they shifted again, rippling across the boards. My throat went dry. I tried to convince myself it was just the light, the angle, maybe my eyes playing tricks on me. But the air felt wrong, dense, electric, like before a storm. I aimed the light higher, and that's when I saw it. Something was crouched in the rafters, too high up for any animal to climb. Its shape blended with the darkness, but I could make out the outline of limbs, long jointed in the wrong places, and the faint glint of eyes staring down at me. My whole body locked up. I didn't breathe. I didn't even blink. The flashlight trembled in my hand, the beam shaking over the figure. It didn't move, just watched. For a long moment, neither of us did anything. Then the light flickered. When it came back, the shape was gone. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over an old feed bucket, my heart slamming in my chest. I ran for the door, grabbed the handle, and it slammed shut before I could touch it. The sound echoed through the barn like a gunshot. I froze again, listening. There was nothing, not even my own breathing. Then from somewhere above me came a scrape, slow, deliberate, like something dragging across the wood. I don't remember deciding to move. My body just did. I threw my shoulder into the door hard enough to make it burst open and bolted into the yard. The evening air hit me like ice. I didn't stop running until I was halfway across the field, gasping for breath, my flashlight swinging wildly in my hand. When I finally turned back, the barn door was closed again. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes staring down from the rafters. Around midnight, I heard something outside my window. A faint scraping sound like nails on wood. I froze in bed, holding my breath, listening. It came again, slow, deliberate, moving along the siding. I got up and went to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see the yard. The barn sat in darkness, but I could have sworn I saw a flicker of movement near its base, like someone slipping inside. The next morning, I told myself I had to face it. Maybe there were animals nesting up there, or maybe someone had been using the barn for shelter. I grabbed a hammer, told myself it was just for protection, and went back. The air inside was colder this time, the smell stronger. I checked every corner, climbed the ladder up to the loft. Nothing, no tracks, no sign of anyone or anything. But the sense of being watched never left. Later that week, I found claw marks along the inside of the barn door. Not deep, but fresh. Clean wood beneath the gray surface. I couldn't explain them. There were no animals big enough to make them, and they were too high up to be from anything on 4 legs. I tried to show my friend, but he just laughed, said it was probably raccoons or a stray dog. Still, I noticed how quiet he got when I told him about the shadows. After that, things started happening inside the house. At first, it was little stuff. Tools not where I left them, the faint smell of damp earth in the hallway. Then the footsteps started. At night, soft but unmistakable. I'd get up, turn on every light, and find nothing. Sometimes, when I passed by a window, I'd see the barn door open again, swinging slowly in the wind, even though I knew I'd locked it tight. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I went out there with a lantern, determined to end it. The air was cold enough to bite, frost starting to creep along the grass. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The light from the lantern threw long shadows across the walls, and I could see where the boards had warped with age. I called out, half expecting an echo. Nothing, just the sound of my own heartbeat. Then, from above me, came the faint creak of the rafters. I looked up. The shadows seemed to deepen around the beams, bending and twisting in ways the light couldn't explain. I could see them move this time, slithering along the ceiling, gathering in the center until they looked like something taking shape. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming at me to run. I backed away, my lantern shaking. The next moment, something fell from the rafters, a length of old rope snapping against the ground. It swung once, slowly, like it had been cut loose. The smell of rot filled the air, stronger than before. I didn't wait to see more. I dropped the lantern and ran, not looking back as the barn filled with the sound of wood groaning and the faint hiss of something moving fast through the dark. When I reached the house, I slammed the door and locked it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat there in the kitchen until sunrise, staring at the window that faced the barn. When morning came, the door was shut again, same as always. But the rope was gone. I moved out a few weeks later. I told myself it was because the house was too far gone, that the repairs were too much for me alone. But the truth is, I couldn't stand the nights. Couldn't stand the silence that came just before I'd hear the faint scrape against the window, like something trying to remember its way in. Sometimes I still dream about that place. In the dream, I'm standing inside the barn again, and the shadows are moving. Not fast, not loud, just enough to let me know they're aware of me. I wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. It's been months since I left, but I swear I can still hear it sometimes, faintly, at the edge of sleep. The slow creak of wood, the whisper of something shifting just out of sight. And every time I drive past an old barn now, especially one left to rot, I can't help but glance at the rafters. I tell myself it's just habit, just nerves, but deep down I'm afraid I'll see eyes staring back. The same ones that watched me all those years ago, patient, waiting, hidden in the dark where the light doesn't reach. We decided to take the trail that most hikers avoided. It wasn't marked on the maps we had, and even the locals I asked at the gas station warned me off, muttering about people getting lost or things out there you don't want to meet. My friend didn't care. He'd grown up in the woods, claimed he knew how to handle himself, and I didn't want to seem like a coward, so I went along. The forest was thick, older than anything I'd walked through before, with towering pines and oaks so tightly packed, the sunlight barely touched the ground. Every few steps, I felt that uncanny silence that sometimes settles over the old woods, where even the birds seem hesitant to sing. We set up camp near a creek that cut a shallow canyon through the rocks. The water was clear and cold, tumbling over stones and echoing softly off the banks. It should have been peaceful, but there was an edge to the quiet that I couldn't shake. My friend set up the tent while I collected firewood, and I couldn't stop noticing how still the shadows were between the trees. No wind, no rustle of small animals, nothing but the constant murmur of the creek. I chalked it up to nerves. By nightfall, we had the fire going and ate some canned food. The woods seemed to press in closer after dark, the shadows deeper than they should have been. My friend wandered a few yards upstream, inspecting the creek, laughing about a fallen log or some bird call that I couldn't hear. I watched him go, and that's when I realized he hadn't come back. I called his name loud and steady, thinking maybe he was just testing me or playing a joke. Silence. I tried again, louder this time, my voice breaking against the thick night air. Nothing. I retraced his steps along the creek, stumbling over roots and wet stones. The mud was soft near the bank, but there were no footprints, no signs that anyone had passed through in hours or even days. I checked every bend, every log he might have hidden behind, but there was nothing. Just the water rushing constant, mocking in its calmness. Panic started to rise, twisting my stomach and making my hands shake. I called his name again, over and over, until I was hoarse. Then I saw it. Across the creek, standing on a flat rock that jutted from the water, was a figure. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It just stood there, impossibly still, silhouetted against the dark forest beyond. My first thought was that it was my friend, playing some kind of sick joke. But it was too tall, limbs too long, the way it held itself too deliberate. My heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to run, wanted to call out, but I was frozen. The figure's gaze, though I can't explain how I could tell, felt like it pierced right through me. I tried to step closer, thinking if I just yelled, maybe it would respond. Maybe it was him. The instant my foot hit the creek bank, the figure vanished. No rustle of leaves, no sound of retreat, just gone, swallowed by the darkness. I called again, desperate, creeping along the rocks and mud, but there was nothing. No trail, no sign of movement, nothing but the sound of water rushing over stones. I shouted until my voice cracked and tears started to blur my vision. I stayed there until the night felt heavier than it should, until the cold seeped through my clothes, but he didn't come back. The next day, I hiked out to the nearest ranger station, reporting my friend missing. Search teams came, combed every inch of that area, but they found no trace. No footprints, no gear, nothing. I went back once, weeks later, trying to retrace our steps, but the creek and the trees seemed to shift, like the forest had absorbed the memory of what happened and refused to release it. The feeling of being watched lingered, subtle but insistent in the spaces between trees, over rocks, behind fallen logs. I started dreaming about that figure, always on the rock, never moving, always watching. At home, even months later, I can't hear running water without feeling that same chill. Streams, creeks, even the faucet sometimes, it all brings back that sound, that rush of water carrying something I can't explain. Friends have tried to convince me it was a trick of the light, that my brain just misremembered, that he probably wandered off and got lost. I want to believe it, I really do, but the memory is too vivid. I can still see that shape the way it stood. Impossibly tall, too still, waiting. I've taken to avoiding trails that are thick or old, places where the forest feels too alive and too silent at the same time. I can't explain why, but sometimes just walking past a creek or a stand of pines, I feel that same presence, the sensation of being measured, watched. I carry that fear with me, the knowledge that the woods can hold something in their shadows that isn't supposed to be there. And I carry the guilt too, the question of whether I could have done more, whether I should have gone further, whether he was trying to warn me and I didn't understand. It hasn't left me. Even now I can see him or whatever it was on that rock, watching, patient, unmoving. And every time I hear water rushing, my chest tightens, my hands shake, and I remember the way the night air hung heavy with the smell of moss and wet stone, the way silence can hide things you're never meant to see, and the way a friend can vanish, leaving only a figure on a rock, still and terrible, in the backwoods of Appalachia. When I moved into the old house at the edge of the hollow, I told myself it was for the quiet. After years of city noise and sleepless nights, the idea of an old farmhouse surrounded by trees felt like the kind of peace I'd been craving. The place sat on a sloping patch of land, hemmed in by thick woods that dropped down into a valley where fog clung like a living thing. The locals called it Sparrow Hollow, though no one could tell me why. When I asked at the gas station, the man behind the counter just shrugged and said, "Ain't no birds down there no more," before changing the subject. The house had been empty for years. It smelled of cedar and dust, the wallpaper curling in spots where the damp crept through. I spent the first few days fixing small things, patching a window, replacing boards on the porch, and by the third night I finally felt settled. I sat by the window that overlooked the hollow, watching the last of the sun slip behind the trees. The air outside was perfectly still, not even the faint hum of insects. For the first time in a long while, I thought I might actually sleep easy. But that night I woke to the sound of whispering. It was faint at first, like the wind carrying voices from far off. I lay there listening, half asleep, convinced it was just my imagination. But as I focused, I realized it wasn't the wind, it was rhythmic, almost conversational. The words weren't in English, not exactly. They came in short, lilting bursts, and though I couldn't understand them, I felt their intent, low, coaxing, like someone trying to draw me in. I turned on the lamp and went to the back door, opening it just a crack. The sound was coming from the hollow, drifting through the trees. It didn't sound close, but it was clear, too clear for how distant it should have been. I stood there for a long time listening, until the cold air made me shiver. When I shut the door, the whispers stopped instantly, like someone had been holding their breath and finally let it go. The next morning, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe air moving through the trees or water running underground. I asked a neighbor about it, an older man who lived about a mile up the road. He frowned when I mentioned it. "Best stay out of that hollow after dark," he said quietly. "Sound carries strange through there. Folks used to say the ground remembers." When I pressed him, he just shook his head and muttered something about old stories. The whispers came again the following night around the same time. Closer this time. I recorded them on my phone, but when I played it back, there was nothing but static. The third night, they returned even louder, rising and falling like a chant just beyond the tree line. The sound filled the house until I couldn't tell if it was outside or seeping through the walls. I felt a strange pull in my chest, an urge to go out there to find the source. My heart said no, but my body felt like it already knew the way. By the fourth night, I gave in. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the yard. The moon was full, hanging low and pale, casting a silver glow over the hollow. The whispers wove through the air like threads surrounding me, leading me toward the woods. My feet sank into the damp grass as I followed, my breath visible in the chill. Every step deeper into the trees felt wrong, but I couldn't stop. The sound was beautiful in a way that made my stomach twist, like a lullaby sung by someone who didn't mean well. I don't remember reaching the creek at the bottom of the hollow, but I remember the way the light from my flashlight flickered. The trees leaned in close, their branches tangled above me. The whispers were all around now, echoing from every direction. I called out, though I'm not sure why or to whom. No one answered. Then the voices shifted, rising in pitch until they almost sounded like laughter. Soft, cruel, echoing in a way that made me stumble back. I turned to leave, but I couldn't find the path. The light was dying and the woods looked wrong, unfamiliar. I remember feeling something brush my arm, a hand, or maybe a branch, I couldn't tell. After that, nothing. When I woke, it was dawn. I was lying at the edge of the hollow, soaked through, my arms covered in scratches. The flashlight was gone. My phone was dead. I stumbled back to the house, every step feeling like I was dragging myself out of a dream I shouldn't have entered. For days after, I told myself I must have sleepwalked or hallucinated, but the scratches said otherwise. I deleted the recording, convinced that giving it any attention would make it worse. Still, the whispers didn't stop. They came again the following week, faint but persistent, as if testing whether I'd listen. I tried playing music at night, even moved my bed to the other side of the house, but it didn't matter. The sound seeped through walls, through sleep into me. Once I tried to shout at them to tell them to stop, but the moment I did, they fell silent. Not faded, not quieted, just gone. And somehow that was worse. A few nights later, I woke to find the back door open. I know I'd locked it. The air inside was freezing, and the smell of damp earth hung heavy in the kitchen. I walked to the doorway and saw footprints in the dirt, bare, human-sized, leading out toward the hollow. I followed them with my eyes until they vanished into the fog. My body froze, caught between running and collapsing. When I finally managed to shut the door, I slid the bolt and sat there on the floor until morning. I started sleeping less. Eating less. I kept the lights on, but that only made the shadows in the corners look deeper. Some nights I'd hear knocking, soft, patient against the back window. Once I heard my own name whispered just outside the glass. I didn't look. I couldn't. Then came the night I woke standing at the edge of the yard, barefoot, staring into the hollow. I didn't remember getting out of bed, didn't remember unlocking the door. The fog was thick, glowing faintly in the moonlight, and beneath it I could see faint movements, shapes shifting like people just beneath the surface of the mist. I should have been terrified, but all I felt was calm, almost peace. The whispers rose again, gentle and insistent, calling me forward. I took a step and then another until something in me snapped and I ran, back to the house, slamming the door, shaking so hard I could barely lock it. That was 2 months ago. I've thought about leaving, but I can't. Every time I pack a bag, something in me hesitates, like I'd be breaking some unspoken agreement. The whispers don't come every night anymore, but when they do, I feel them closer, right against the windows, sliding through the cracks in the walls. Sometimes I find new scratches on my arms when I wake up, faint and parallel, like fingers. I stopped telling people about it. I stopped calling the neighbor, stopped pretending it would stop on its own. The last thing I did was board up the back door, but even that doesn't help. The sound still seeps through. It's quieter now, softer, almost affectionate, like it's waiting for me to answer. I try to tell myself it's all in my head, that I'm lonely and the woods are playing tricks on me. But last night, when I stood by the window, I saw movement in the hollow. Figures, faint and pale, standing in the fog where the creek bends. They didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel their eyes on me, and beneath the faint rustle of leaves, I swear I heard my own voice whisper back. I rented a small cabin deep in the woods, far enough from the nearest town that I could finally escape everything. The noise, the work, the people. The road in was narrow, gravel, and wound through ridges and hollows that made the drive feel endless even during the day. When I finally arrived, the sun was dipping behind the trees, and the forest swallowed the last of the light. The cabin sat on a little rise overlooking a field that rolled into thick woods. I had imagined myself here 1,000 times alone, the quiet settling over me like a warm blanket. But the moment I stepped out of the car, something felt off, like the trees were leaning in to watch. The cabin itself was small, rustic, the kind of place with a wood stove, a single bedroom and a porch that creaked when you walked on it. I unpacked quickly, trying to convince myself I was imagining the unease curling in my chest. That first evening, as I was taking a final look around, I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the road just beyond the tree line. My first thought was that it was a neighbor, someone who lived nearby, coming to check on the cabin. But there was no one for miles. The figure didn't move, didn't shift its weight, didn't blink. It just stood there staring at me. I froze, my stomach twisting. The figure was humanoid, vaguely, but its posture was strange, stiff in a way that no human would naturally hold for long. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone out hiking, someone lost, but I knew deep down that didn't make sense. When I stepped toward the car to leave, my hands trembling, the engine wouldn't turn over. I checked the lights, the keys, even the battery. Nothing. And then I heard it. The soft crunch of footsteps circling the cabin. Slow, deliberate, moving closer to the windows, then fading, then coming back. I sat inside, my back against the door, flashlight in hand, listening. Every few seconds a branch would snap outside, a scrape along the siding, and I would flinch. I dared not open the door. Hours passed, though I didn't sleep, listening to the rhythmic, patient sound of the figure moving around. At one point I thought I saw its shadow cross the curtains, though the moonlight was too dim for anything to be clear. Morning came slowly. When I finally stepped outside, the figure was gone. No footprints in the gravel, no sign that anyone or anything had been there at all. I tried to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, nerves, isolation. I spent the next few days hiking the area, meeting the locals, asking about the stretch of road, hoping someone would tell me I was overreacting. Some shrugged, others avoided the question until finally one older man said quietly, "People see things out there sometimes, don't rightly know what. Best not to look too long." He refused to elaborate. Weeks later, another local mentioned seeing something odd on that same road, though no one could say what it was. I wanted to laugh it off, but my stomach clenched, remembering the stillness, the gaze, the impossible patience in that figure. I left the cabin after a week, telling myself I'd just come back another time, when the road and the woods didn't feel so oppressive. But every time I drive by that stretch of road at night now, my eyes catch something at the tree line. A dark shape, perfectly still, always watching. I can feel it, the same way I did the first night, and it makes my hands shake, my pulse spike. I can't explain why it stays in my mind so vividly. The way it didn't move, didn't breathe, yet seemed alive in a way that nothing should be. Even now, I think about that night. About the cold, the silence, the feeling of being encircled by something patient and deliberate. The memory doesn't fade. Every time I drive through that area, I check the edges of the road, expecting to see that figure waiting. I've never gone back to the cabin, and I don't know if I ever will. There's something in the hollows there, something that watches and waits, something that doesn't belong in the world I understand. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and the wind stirs the trees just right, I swear I can hear the soft sound of footsteps behind me, circling, patient, deliberate, just beyond the edge of the road.